Greetings, listeners. You're tuning in to Sinister Soup, an audio imprint of Grendel Press for lovers of everything dark and delicious. I'm your host, Clay Vermolum. We hope you enjoy today's story, and remember to stay tuned afterwards for a featured interview with the author. See you on the other side. The File on Stephen Hill by Gordon Linzner. Stephen Hill? Sure, I remember him. Came up here with that Professor Andrews last month. Died here, too. The sheriff leaned back, bracing his chair against the wall and his feet on the time-worn desk. He pointed to a small file cabinet in the corner of his office, half hidden by the open door. Top drawers contain unnatural deaths, he continued. I clear him out every year or two, but Hill's still in there. I opened the indicated drawer and withdrew a slim folder marked UNN.death. On the face of the folder, several years were crossed out. The present year was not. Inside were several sheets of canary yellow bond paper, legal size, but folded at the bottom to fit inside the folder. I skipped over 2 drownings and one marked UNIND ? Concerning a stranger who had been crushed by a falling tree and found Stephen Hill's next to last. Briefly, it recounted the discovery of Hill's body, the professor's private autopsy, and subsequent demands for immediate burial with dissected portions of Hill's autonomy sewn back on. Most awkwardly, about the skull. I was already generally aware of these off events from Professor Andrews himself, except for the grotesque reassembling of Hill's corpse. Perhaps the old man really had started to crack with Steve's death. I replaced the papers in the folder and rested it on the sheriff's desk. There were 2 other deaths in that clearing, I said. I don't see them here. Nope, replied the sheriff. The first was well over 2 years ago, and I'd already thrown it out. I remember it pretty well, though. It was the first unnatural death case I'd handled since I took this post. The weirdest, too. Did the professor tell you about it? Vaguely, I replied. Would you fill me in? On one condition, that you promise not to try what Hill and the professor did. What few people live around here have got brains enough not to go wandering around places like that clearing at night? Scout's honor, I promised, holding up 2 fingers. It's a matter of idle curiosity. All right. 2 brothers, Luke and James Hartley, went out hunting one night. Poaching, actually. There ain't much to hunt around here at night except on private land. Next morning, Mrs. Green comes pounding on the door, waking me up, and together we go down to where Luke Hartley is sitting in the middle of a dirt road, hands clamped tight over his ears, yelling and screaming like the devil himself was after him. I tell ya, it was one of the spookiest things I'd ever seen. Couldn't get a sensible word out of him, so I called the doctor, and in a half hour he had poor Luke so full of sedatives he couldn't see straight, and still we had to force his hands down. Well, I got a couple volunteers together, and we fanned out in a circle from where Luke had been. By noon, we'd found Jim's body in the clearing. Not a mark on him, but a look on his face like you'd chopped his arm off or something. Did anybody examine the body to determine the cause of death? The sheriff laughed. Listen, son, this backwoods can hardly afford to pay me, let alone a coroner, to come in every time somebody dies. Oh, I tried to figure out what killed him, but my equipment here ain't exactly modern. For all I know, he could have died from an ingrown toenail. We just bury 'em before they start to stink. The professor had Jim's grave dug up, but after 2 years, there ain't much left to examine. How about the second death? Well, that's not nearly as interesting. Professor had a file on that one. I told him he could keep it, but because I'd be throwing it out in a couple months anyway. He had that body dug up too. It was in a little better condition, although the professor commented that the brain had decomposed rather quickly. I just smiled and cracked that old Joe didn't have much brain to begin with joke. I smiled politely. That seemed to satisfy the sheriff. I tapped the folder on the desk and asked, Has anybody managed to get a coherent statement out of Luke Hartley? Professor wanted to, but Luke had already died. Smashed his head against a wall when a fly got into his cell. I told you, we're a poor area, son. Our institutions can't afford fancy padding. The sheriff slapped a mosquito at his neck, then asked, "How is the professor, anyway? He looked pretty sick when he left a couple weeks ago." "He's dead," I replied. "He died last week. I just came to take care of a few things he left behind." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Quite all right. Now, if you can do me one last favor, Sheriff, and direct me to the cabin he used." It wasn't quite all right, I thought, as I inched my Volvo along dirt roads which twisted at the least expected times. Although I'd promised Professor Andrews not to investigate too closely, I could not lay to rest the mysterious death of my friend Steve. All I knew before he left with old Andrews was that the professor had a theory concerning the two mysterious deaths in the clearing. All I knew on Andrews' return was that Steve was dead and that the truth was more horrible than any theory they could have conceived. I finally arrived at the cabin, which impressed me as more of a glorified lean-to. Animals had visited in the last few weeks, scavenging through what food supplies Andrews had left. In one corner of the darkened single room, half chewed by squirrels, was the report that the sheriff had given Andrews. The top half was missing, so I never did find out Joe's full name. Remaining was the date of burial and a notation that the position of the body was similar to that of Jim Hartley's, particularly the facial expression. Beneath that, scratched in Professor Andrews' tight handwriting, read, "Burial, cranial cavity EMP. Pause. Decomp. Uneven. Otherwise." On a separate scrap of paper, which had somehow escaped the notice of the squirrels, Andrew had written, "Vamp. In. Attrib. Of first Vict." It was scratched out, but still legible. And over those abbreviated words he had printed with uncommon boldness in all caps, "Too horrible." I stuffed these scraps of paper into my shirt pocket and began searching through the rubble of tin cans and flour bags until I found the little tin box, still tightly locked, that Professor Andrews had asked me to destroy for him. I had every intention of carrying out the old man's wishes to burn the contents, but I had to open the box first. I brought it outside and cracked open the lock with a heavy stone. Inside was a small but bulky manila envelope bulging slightly in the middle and half a reel of recording tape, the end roughly torn. I returned to the cabin, hoping the professor had also left his battery-powered tape recorder. He had. I found it on a high shelf near the roof, which I hadn't seen before. The battery no longer worked, but I was able to replace it with one from my transistor radio, which I've carried with me ever since my Volvo's radio went dead on me. More diligent searching produced an empty reel, or most of one. It would still take the tape, though. Finally, I switched the machine on, expecting to hear Andrew's droning monotone. Instead, I was startled by the voice of my close friend Stephen Hill. 45, said the tape. I recognized this as the second half of Steve's report on his last night. The professor had claimed that the first half, which he'd brought back with him, was all that remained. I thought this strange. Although Andrews refused to speak about many things, he was never one to deny the truth utterly. Steve's voice continued. The usual night sounds have died down, which is odd. The croaking of frogs, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of owls flying through the trees, all gone. The only noise I hear, aside from the whirring of my tape recorder, is the very faint hum of flying insects, as though very far away. Could this unnatural silence cause death by fright among the superstitious people of this area? There, coming out of the south, seems to be a swarm of some kind of flying insect. A rather small form, and definitely unusual for this time of night, Professor. I've shut off my flashlight to avoid attracting their attention, but I'm afraid I was a little slow. Looks like a tiny cloud in the pale moonlight coming toward me. Well, I suppose I can put up with the nuisance for a little while. The buzzing sounds of tiny wings grew faintly louder. The wind has died down, Professor. Beginning to feel as if I'm staring at a painting. Everything seems so still. Sudden slapping sound. Must be gnats. They're too small to be anything else. Wish they'd land on something besides me. More slapping sounds, more buzzing. Damn gnats must think I'm their home the way they cluster around me. Suddenly I heard a couple heavy snorts like a man trying unsuccessfully to sneeze. When Steve's voice came back, it was high-pitched and weak. "I'll keep my nostrils pinched together. Keep these gnats out of my nose for the same reason I'm trying to keep my lips as tight as possible while talking. Only wish I had something to plug my ears. Can't seem to keep the little buggers out of them." At this point in the narrative, the buzzing became so loud that distinguishing words became difficult and, in several cases, impossible. "I've seen swarms. Gnats
And every Lincoln's woman, annoying as hell. Ouch! Bastards bite. Inside my ear, brought insect repellent. God damn! Feels like the whole swarm of my ears. Oh God, the pain! Oh, they're chewing inside my head. My God! My God! They're eating my brain! They're eating... Get away!
The tread of heavy boots thudded against the soft earth, slowly fading as Steve ran from his recorder, his encampment, and suddenly, before the sound should have faded completely, they stopped. The buzzing decreased slightly. An inhuman scream of agony rasped the pitiful speaker on the professor's machine, a scream which, fortunately, could not have been faithfully reproduced by any man-made recording equipment. I shuddered, thinking what it must have been like, sounded in person. I would probably have gone mad from the very sound of that unholy cry. I thought briefly of Luke Hartley. The monotonous buzzing of gnats, as Steve had called them, continued until the tape ran out of reel. I knew now why Professor Andrews had hastily replaced the top of Steve's skull in order to immediate burial. No one else had seen what he saw behind Hill's vacant eyes. No one could even guess who had not heard this tape. No one but Andrews and myself, and Andrews was dead. I tore open the manila envelope and poured out its contents, a single block of amber. Trapped within it were two tiny insects no larger than gnats, but magnified by the solid black of clear brownish resin. Magnified enough that one could distinguish legs, wings, and the most terrifying aspect of their nature. Don't know how Professor Andrews obtained his specimens. I don't want to know. I've since carried them out of the old man's wishes and burned his notes, the tape, and that accursed block of amber. Where the normal insect-like head should have been, the gnats possessed a tiny, hideously distorted, but recognizably human face. The face of Stephen Hill. Thank you, Gordon, for sharing that disturbing story with all of us. I'm glad we're releasing it in the winter, when all the bugs are dead. But I guess that will make it extra scary if you do hear something buzzing about your ear. Keep some amber handy, my friends. This one worked great for me, as I always love a good piece of epistolary horror. The small cast and fast pace make it an easy story to fall into, and you certainly know how to tie a narrative together with an ending, sir. If you enjoyed this story, you're in luck. Gordon has lots of other work out there, and you can find it all at the links in the show notes. Thanks again, Gordon, for sharing this story with us. This has been Sinister Soup, an audio imprint of Grendel Press for lovers of everything dark and delicious. And I've been Clay Vermullum, your host. We will continue releasing episodes into February 2026, so tune in next month for another installment of the show. Thanks for being here today, and we'll see you on the other side.